Hello, can everyone hear me?
All right, Mr.
Hi. Thank you so much for being here with us this morning to talk about um, delivering on an ambitious promise, lessons learned, and the future of HomeKey. So we appreciate all of you that are here and anyone watching virtually. We hope you have lots of questions. We have some experts here to answer them. So thank you again for being here. I'd like to start by saying this panel is as nimble as the Home Key program. We had a last minute change to the presenters. Um, so, oops, scarf is falling off. And Burbick Housing Corporation, no, City of Fresno Housing Authority will not be able to be here today. So we do have one of the consultants that's been working with Enterprise here to talk about HomeKey. So thank you very much, Lieben, for stepping in last minute. So with that, I'd like to start by showing today's agenda. We'll have a HomeKey overview from Tim Lawless with HCD, followed by a small presentation on the enterprise technical assistance that's being provided for HomeKey. Then we'll have formal panel introductions, a really robust panel discussion, followed by Q&A. So with that, I'd like to hand it off to Tim Lawless with HCD to talk about the HomeKey program.
Sure, that'd be great. All right, well, thank you, Shannon, very much for that introduction. And good morning, everybody. Tim Lawless, Branch Chief at the California Department of Housing and Community Development. Just wanted to give a brief update on HomeKey today to kind of level set on the conversation that will follow. Perfect, thank you. So just a quick reminder, HomeKey really emerged just a couple years ago as a response to the pandemic, when we thought those experiencing homelessness were really at grievous risk due to their inability to self-quarantine. This led to the rollout of a couple programs that are related, but sometimes confused because of their similar names. RoomKey being sort of the temporary initial response, where counties were master leasing temporarily hotels to quickly shelter those experiencing homelessness. That started back in March. And then in July 2020, HomeKey was established. And that primarily used Federal CARES Act funds, and it provided grants to local jurisdictions, tribes, co-applicant developers to actually acquire hotels, RoomKey hotels or otherwise, as well as other building types in order to adapt these units for long-term residential use. The sort of well-known challenge with HomeKey is, of course, a very aggressive initial expenditure deadline of about 6 months. So, program established in July, funds had to be spent by December 2020, meaning that HCD had to sort of quickly establish program rules. Applicants literally had just about a month to apply for the funds. Then HCD had to turn around and quickly make awards so these projects could close by the end of 2020. So given that kind of turnaround, we were so incredibly impressed with the amount of interest at the local level with the program. Kind of fast forwarding to the end of the first round of HomeKey, this is sort of a frequently cited stat line, but I think it's worth repeating here because it's just so impressive. 94 projects ended up being funded with 6,000 units brought online in under just a year in HomeKey 1.0. And that sort of unit breakdown you can see here on the slide, it's sort of broken down by regions, which is helpful to see. This is all in our legislative report, by the way, our HomeKey legislative report, which is on our HomeKey website. I think there's a link to that in the slide deck later on, but just wanted to point that out. Next slide, please. So in the context of that HomeKey 1.0, success, the program was scaled up even further, right? In the 21-22 budget, which is, broadly referred to as the California Comeback Plan. That budget invested $12 billion in in homelessness, generally speaking, across sort of the spectrum of homeless programs coming down from the state. And of that 12 billion, almost 3 billion was dedicated to HomeKey, kind of split across 2 budget years. So 1.4 billion this year, 1.3 billion in 22-23. So we are right in sort of in the middle of this current 1.4 billion funding round. And as you can see on the slide, we sort of kept a lot of the same HomeKey core principles, including, acting with a sense of urgency, not moving quite as quickly as the frenetic pace of the first round, but certainly still moving at a pace that is, faster than is typical in order to respond to the homelessness crisis. So, HomeKey awardees are currently required to expend the funds and bring the units online within about a year, which is still quite fast. And then we are also making awards on a sort of a rolling over-the-counter basis, so that as projects are ready to be funded, HCD is able to make those awards sort of in a timely fashion. Also continuing with our equity focus with this program. Thank you. And that sort of plays out in a number of ways, right? We have our geographic set-asides where we target awards to different regions throughout the state. That's something we did in HomeKey 1 as well. We have set-asides for tribal governments. We have set-asides for homeless youth. We continue to require strategies to promote racial equity. And those are just sort of a few of the examples in sort of the equity space of the program. And on a related note, I would just add that we want to ensure as well, from an equity perspective, that applicants that need help accessing these HomeKey funds really get the help that they need. So in that regard, I just wanted to acknowledge sort of the strong partnership we have currently with Enterprise and their bench of consultants who provide a really broad range of technical expertise to those applicants that need that sort of help. And that's sort of in addition to what HCD already provides, but it's incredibly helpful in terms of making sure that communities that might otherwise struggle to make it through our application process can do that and sort of run a successful project. So just wanted to acknowledge that partnership. And then in terms of where we are with the current sort of tranche of 1.4 billion, as many know, we released that funding opportunity back in September, and we are really pleased with the response that we've gotten to date. We've actually gotten about 2.2 billion in total requests, so we are oversubscribed quite a bit given the 1.4 we have available to award. And in terms of what we've awarded so far, of course, our team is furiously getting through those applications that have been submitted, but we have actually made 832 million in awards to date, which will produce about 3,000 units thus far. And still quite a number of awards to make here in the coming weeks. You can stay on that slide for a sec. Thanks. Just wrapping it up here. And then just a few other points in terms of what we're seeing so far. I think we'll get into this more in the panel discussion, but generally, I think this round we are seeing more projects that will convert to permanent supportive housing right away, since there is more time to spend the funds relative to the first round. And we did increase our sort of per unit award as well in this round compared to round one, both on the capital and the operating side, which I think promotes, sort of the feasibility of an immediate conversion. Still seeing some projects that are going to sort of start off as interim and with a future conversion to permanent after more funding is sought. But and those are perfectly fine approaches. But to the extent we can get to permanent units right away, all the better. And we're sort of pleased to see that outcome so far. And then in terms of the project types this round, still, plenty of hotel conversions. That's sort of the home key bread and butter project type, right? And those are great. But also seeing, a good number of modular new construction projects come through, some commercial conversions, and then even some acquisitions of newly built apartment buildings. We're seeing that down in the Los Angeles area, which is a really interesting approach. And then finally, I would just kind of give a plug here for our home key dashboard. This is now on our website. This was rolled out just like a month or two ago. It's not completely up to date right now because of when this PowerPoint was created, but it should, at this point, if you go online, have the updated numbers I just mentioned a little bit ago, and has a lot of different sort of data points around project types and units created, the regions where those awards are made, and so on. So that's a really good resource I would point you all to. All right, so with that very brief overview of the program, I'm looking forward to today's discussion, and I'll hand it off to Shannon. Yeah.
Okay, I'm Shannon Lampkins-Jones. I'm a director with Enterprise, working with Julian Tucker, who's a program officer, and we work in conjunction with HCD to support their home key efforts, providing technical assistance to lower capacity jurisdictions that need assistance building capacity to get through the home key application process. Enterprise is a national nonprofit focused on housing production and preservation. Our three pillars that we target are increasing housing supply, advancing racial equity, and building resilience and upward mobility. So with respect to home key, in the first round of home key, our role was to administer philanthropic funds that we received from philanthropic partners to provide technical assistance. So we received $46 million in funds from Blue Shield of California, Kaiser Permanente, and the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative to provide operating subsidies to 45 jurisdictions. Our role with Home Key 2.0 has expanded to provide pre-application guidance with a bench of consultants, and Lieben is one of our phenomenal consultants. And we provide high-touch TA to applicants and continue our support with them through post-award. So post-award, we create what's called cohorts to do peer-to-peer learning. So far in Home Key 2.0, we've received just over $52 million in philanthropic support from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, Crankstart Foundation, Blue Shield of California, Common Spirit Health, Kaiser Permanente, Salesforce, and Facebook, which is now Meta. Pat, I called him out. Pat's our phenomenal director of development that was key in getting these funds. So this is just a slide that shows some of the media coverage and for 1.0 projects that show the impact of home key in different jurisdictions. So to further talk about Home Key 1.0, we were able to support 45 projects totaling 2,474 doors, which created 2,111 units. And I included a quote here from Darlene Spohr, who's the executive director of Arcata House Partnership. In talking to her about the impact of these philanthropic funds, she mentioned that these funds were literally life-saving. They're able to move people from the streets into housing, and she said the home key funds are literally saving lives. And we've heard that from a few groups that have done this sort of housing. So for all of the practitioners who are wondering if this is something that you want to get involved with, it is hard work. Everyone will admit it's difficult. HCD has been really nimble in making this program work for applicants, but the end result is this is really making an impact. So for HomeKey 2.0, again, Enterprise is providing more in-depth TA with our bench of consultants. And we have groups that have lots of different specialties from, and I think that may be on the next slide, from real estate development to supportive housing, housing first. But Enterprise has started to host a transition age youth working group to support applicants that are interested in applying for the TAY set-aside. And we're also working with HCD and their tribal affairs team to focus on barriers for tribal applicants and how to minimize those barriers. So to date, Enterprise has provided technical assistance to over 80 different jurisdictions and tribal groups. And of those, some are still actively working through their applications, some have submitted applications, some are waiting for round 3. But so far, 15 public agencies that receive technical assistance in this current round have been awarded around $174 million. And these are just 4 examples of the jurisdictions we've been working with. And again, in terms of our TA, our bench of consultants have expertise in several areas, including real estate development, racial equity, which is a huge piece of HomeKey, tribal affairs, supportive services, and TAY. And this is just a sampling of the technical assistance that's available from our bench of consultants. So thank you again for being here. And with that, I will pass it over to Julian Tucker to introduce the panel.
Hello, everyone. My name is Julian Tucker. I'm a program officer with Enterprise Community Partners, and I work with Shannon on our HomeKey-related efforts. So we'll take this opportunity to quickly introduce our panelists. So you've obviously met Tim Lawless with HCD. In the middle here, we have Larry Florin with Burbank Housing Development. And yeah, we will just quickly show a few slides. And these slides have some information on the various projects that Larry's firm, Burbank Housing, was involved in with HomeKey Round 1. Larry, do you want to take a moment to just quickly introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Good morning. Larry Florin. I'm the CEO of Burbank Housing. Actually, quite a few Burbank Housing staff here, so as I say things that are incorrect, if you could text me with the correct answer, that would be helpful. So we're actually, Burbank is a nonprofit affordable housing development company based in Santa Rosa. We've primarily worked in Sonoma and Napa County and built over 5,000 units of housing in the 42 years we've been in existence. Currently own a little over 3,300, I believe, homes that we manage. And the HomeKey program was new to us, obviously to everybody, but we have done permanent supportive housing, mostly as set-aside units within existing developments up to now. So this was a new experience for us. But
That's great. Thank you, Larry. Thank you for being here. Yeah, as we go through the slides, so you'll see some slides here in a moment from the Fresno Housing Authority, which unfortunately Michael Duarte, who was our third panelist, was not able to be here today. But Shannon can show you the slides. I believe there are 4 projects that the Fresno Housing Authority was involved in, so you can see some of the information about those projects there. But we did have last minute Lieben Shao step up to the plate, and as Shannon mentioned, she's one of the members of our TA consultant bench who's been working with us in round 2. So Lieben, I'll give you a sec.
Thank you, Julian. I'm Lieben Shao from Mosaic Urban Development. We are a Bay Area located consulting firm. We provide project management consulting as well as what we call government technical assistance and financial consulting. So we've been fortunate to participate in Enterprise's TA bench for the HomeKey 2.0 round. And it's been a very enriching experience for us to both have the opportunity to provide the technical assistance, but also learn from our applicants. So I'm hoping to share some of that with folks today. Our role has been one where our approach has been to meet people where they are. So that has ranged from providing technical assistance on really strictly the application all the way to capacity building in order to be ready to put together a project. And it's been a really rewarding experience for us.
Great. Thank you very much for being here again, all of you. And yeah, we're looking forward to a really robust and interesting discussion today. So I think I'll just start off by asking, generally, can you talk a little bit about what's worked well with your experience with the HomeKey program? Larry, do you want to start off?
Okay, I guess I could start. So we've actually been successful in being awarded 5 HomeKey awards, 2 in the first round and 3 in the current round. And because I want to do business with HCD in the future, I'll tell you that they actually have been unusually helpful. I'm sure you can apply. But it has been a really collaborative effort with HCD, which I would say could be a model going forward, hopefully, for the rest of the agency. But there has been more of a give and take. In the past, it always seems to be this black hole that you submit your application into, and then maybe you'll hear something, or maybe they'll return a phone call. In this case, they were all over us to try to make sure we got our applications in successful. The other part that worked well was really our partnerships that we had, and we've had a number of them on the different projects. We were approached, because we're a community-based nonprofit working primarily in certain jurisdictions historically, we were approached by those jurisdictions and asked if we would partner with them on the applications. And being able to partner with the local agency was huge. Just this was a high priority, clearly, for the jurisdictions we worked with. They scheduled special meetings of their councils. We were able to secure project-based vouchers for some of our projects, which we can get into in a bit, out of the normal process, which could not have happened if it wasn't for the partnerships we had with those jurisdictions. And the third, most important, has been our service providers who have been our partners on these projects. We are a real estate company, to be frank about it. We're really good at building, we're really good at entitling, really good at managing projects, even compliance we're pretty good at. But what we're not as strong on is on the social services or on the service components of this. And so having good partners has been really, really, really critical to being successful in any of the projects. At this point, we have one of the 4 of the 5 that we've been awarded projects that are up and running, and the other 4 are still in the development phase. So we'll see how it works out. But up to now, the program has run really well. One other really small thing not a small thing, but it's been helpful, is that the money comes in the form of grants. And so as opposed to loans, big, big, big deal. And I hope that becomes a model for other programs going forward. So.
Great. Thank you very much for that. Tim, do you want to respond since Larry called out HCD specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo a lot of those remarks. The partnership between the state and the local governments and developer partners, super important. I mean, this was at the beginning of the pandemic. The money had to be spent quickly. It really forced sort of a clarity of focus and a real partnership. So I think that became sort of the template for HomeKey moving forward. Super important. Other things that I would maybe echo that worked well. I think the over-the-counter approach is very helpful for programs like this, where it's an acquisition and oftentimes it's very time sensitive. It's a bit of a unique program in that we provide a lot of the capital funding. It's not as complicated of a capital stack that needs to be secured over time the way it works with some of our other perm financing programs. So it's a bit of an unusual program in that regard, but I think very helpful in terms of bringing units online quickly. And then the other piece I would maybe highlight as key is, the land use and CEQA streamlining that came with this program. These are generally sort of by right projects, not requiring discretionary approvals. There is a CEQA exemption if certain conditions are met. So that really gives our applicants, the certainty they need, I think, to move these projects forward.
Great. Thanks for talking about the CEQA and the streamlining and everything like that. Super important components of the program. Lieben, do you have anything to add here?
Sure, and I should share that we are one of the HomeKey TA consultants that focuses on tribal applicants. So for us I won't repeat what's already been said. I agree in terms of the CEQA and NEPA, as well as the benefits of the partnership with HCD and the accessibility of the HCD staff and a willingness to step forward and help in every way. But in terms of efforts to remove barriers to entry, the other things that have worked well have been really the creation of the pre-application consultation so that there's an early assessment of what applicants need and an ability to help, so that applications that otherwise, I think, would not come in the door have been able to come in the door because HCD staff and the TA bench have been able to help problem solve early on. So that has been really beneficial. It's also created a face of the HCD staff and an approachability for the applicants in a way the other programs don't have. We have some of our program applicants just pick up the phone and call HCD staff, even about what seem small questions, but these small questions are questions that if they didn't have answered, they may hesitate to move forward with an application. And the HCD staff have stepped forward to problem solve very early on, as opposed to kind of leaving it to the applicant to solve the problem and then come in with a complete, fully baked project. So I feel like the pre-application consultation has been extremely beneficial for our applicants, especially the BIPOC applicants. The creation of the HCD Tribal Affairs Unit, HCD also added a tribally focused attorney, and who also I think is supported by 2 other staff, to the Legal Affairs Division. She also participates in the weekly tribal calls, which are critical for moving those projects forward and removing the structural barriers.
Great. Yeah, thank you for speaking about the importance of the pre-application consultation and the tribal affairs team. Super important from what we've seen so far. You all kind of spoke about the need to develop these strategic partnerships and how those have been so instrumental in HomeKey projects. So can you speak a little bit more about your experience in sort of cultivating these partnerships, not just with HCD, but potentially with other groups within the context of HomeKey? And then do you have any advice for folks who might be considering applying? Larry?
I'm just guessing. The partnerships, so the community partnerships were in fact probably the most important. Just being there to be nimble enough when communities have needs that you're able to respond. We found that in 2017 when we had the wildfires in the North Bay. Burbank played a really instrumental role and was able to cement our relationships with local government. So it was natural when HomeKey became available, or the opportunity became available, that communities, local jurisdictions would come to us. So those are important. The social service partnerships, I think, are really, in our mind, really important and critical. And frankly, we're still developing the ways to measure success in terms of the program and in terms of the residents that will be in our program. So we have been meeting internally because this is a different type of property management experience than we normally have within our portfolio. We are going to be more involved with the residents well-being than we would be on a normal basis in a normal rental project. So having the right social service provider as your partner is critical. We went and visited a number of different permanent supportive housing projects that were operational in the Bay Area in order to see what worked best. And the one thing we were told over and over and over again was the relationship between the owner, the property manager, and the provider who are dealing with the residents. On a regular basis, there'd be communication. So on many of the sites, there's like a standing meeting with the residents, or just we discuss the situation of the residents, what needs to be done, what can be done to be able to make sure that they're successful in successfully being housed. Those, I think, were really critical. The other part, and somebody said this earlier about with the healthcare providers, so they are sort of, I've always thought of them as this holy grail, this money that could be out there, but it's not quite coming into the affordable housing world. Well, in this particular venture, it is starting to come in. It's coming in through being able to support the services components of what we do. So on the statewide level, we're very, very grateful for the funding that we've received through Enterprise on the philanthropic side. But we also have local health service providers with who are contributing directly to these programs because they see this as serving that population that might, in fact, they call them the frequent flyers, the folks who show up in their emergency rooms all the time. These can actually go to help reduce the numbers of visits that occur. And so we've started to see philanthropic contributions of significant size come in for these programs because they can see a tangible result for it.
Thank you very much, Larry. Lieben, do you have anything to add from the technical assistance point of view here?
Sure. Only something small, which is really that I think this has leveraged partnerships that otherwise would have been less deep. So perhaps people were aware of each other, but they now are having conversations about what the system should look like and what kind of relationship should occur. So the developer, along with the service providers, along with the local government entity, are looking at the state funding. They want to leverage the state funding, and then they know they need to put their resources forward in order to make these happen. But then as you start to put together these projects, to some degree, it's about creating a whole new system through these relationships. So you see folks talking about, well, what is the outcome? Like what you were saying about how do you measure success? So we're doing things in a very different way. It's beyond what you can call housing enriched services, because those outcomes will only be achieved, the successful outcomes, to the extent that every entity is working really thoughtfully and closely together.
Wonderful, thank you. Tim, do you have anything to speak about here, maybe like on the state side? Yeah, what have you seen from the most successful applicants maybe in terms of their approach to these partnerships?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo a lot of what was said already. The services are... Is this better? No, not really. How about this? All right, success. I would echo, the supportive services partnership, so important. I feel like the acquisition piece is just the very beginning, and then the work that follows is so important, and the outcomes are so dependent upon the quality of the services provided and the partnerships that are in place, like Larry said, around the service provider and the property manager. I would also encourage partnerships with the local housing authority on the voucher side. Obviously, housing authorities can apply directly, and they do, which is great. But if it's sort of a city or county or tribe, gaining access to vouchers for these projects, incredibly important from a sustainability perspective. Not always possible because of, we don't have enough vouchers in California, and you can only project base a certain number of them. But nonetheless, those partnerships I think are really important relative to project sustainability over time.
Terrific, thank you. I want to now ask and pivot a little bit about to yeah, just discussing some barriers, some challenges that have come up. So, what are some barriers or some issues that you face? Maybe some unexpected things that have cropped up that have required kind of creativity or out of the box thinking. Creative solutions. Lieben, do you want to start?
Okay, it looks like everyone wants to punt this one to me. I'll go back to some of the things I was saying earlier. To some degree, people are creating a whole new housing services system. And so you're building the bus while driving it. And folks want to get funded. But there's also the reality that they are talking about a program that they're creating while they're applying. So that has been a huge challenge. And how do you build a program that's sustainable while getting your application in time to ensure that you can secure an award for the housing? So the timing piece with that has been challenging. I think for our tribal applicants, the whole program was really designed for a more urban and mainstream housing industry. So the limited capital resources that our tribes face in this state can range dramatically depending on whether a tribe has economic development options and whether they're federally recognized or not. So the federally recognized ones have access to the NAHASDA resources, but even those are limited because the amount is already not enough to serve all of the needs of the tribes. So then you talk about, okay, how do you make that capital match? And the capital match expectations, while perfectly reasonable for cities, counties, housing authorities, are really not reasonable for the vast majority of our tribes. And that applies not just for capital match, but also operating match. In terms of timing for award and disbursement, that can be really challenging. I think that we could be more transparent about how long it's going to take from application to award to disbursement so that applicants can better negotiate their purchase and sale terms. One of the challenges, though, is a lot of folks are competing with the mainstream market. So even if we were more transparent, it does not necessarily mean that the timing enables folks to secure what would be, otherwise ideal properties to address the homelessness crisis. So I do think that there are programmatic things that, we could restructure to address homelessness better and get more units built.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Larry, you look like you want to jump in here.
Just on the tribal part of it, we were actually very gratified that we have a relationship with a local tribe in Sonoma County called the Kashaya Band of Pomo Indians that we're actually building a tax credit project with. And when HomeKey came about, they approached us and they said, we wanted to partner with you on our HomeKey application. And this has been a really personally very fulfilling, is that we're building capacity at the tribe. This is not a tribe. There are two types of tribes, as you may know, in California, gaming tribes and non-gaming tribes. This is a non-gaming tribe, and so they tend to not have a lot of resources that they can access. And so we've been helping them by bringing resources to the table and building capacity so they'll be able to go forward, manage the project on their own, but also be able to do ones in the future. And that's been very gratifying to see that.
Definitely. I kind of want to stick on this tribal point for just a moment. You just kind of spoke about it, but what specifically gravitated you towards that relationship with the Kashaya tribe and Lieben also? What have you learned in your work, your technical assistance work with tribal applicants?
So I did have some experience. I came from county government in dealing with tribes and actually negotiated compacts, so I'm not unfamiliar with the relationships there, but there are some very deep-seated, I guess best word would be suspicion, the best way to put it. I personally have a close relationship with the tribal chair, the head of the Kashaya, and so we have that kind of relationship where we trust each other. But there's got to be a buildup of trust in there to be able to work together, and that was overall the most important thing before we could move forward. Understanding specific and unique circumstances that the tribal members were encountering, and being able to really express that, and everything we did was with that sort of type of equity lens, or the lens of helping to empower the tribe along the way. Really, really, really critically important in the relationship, and frankly something that gives us a lot of gratification that we're able to do that.
It's fantastic to hear. Thank you. Lieben, do you want to?
Sure. I think we're working with 14, I hope I'm not missing someone, 14 tribes now across the state. And I think with every tribe we've learned something new. And initially it was really about how tribal financing is different, how tribal homelessness looks completely different from what the mainstream housing industry conceives of, and how to respect domestic sovereignty in these nation-to-nation relationships, while also providing that technical assistance. I think what Larry was just talking about is critical, the trust building and maintaining that trust, doing what you say you're going to do, and also consistency in terms of capacity building, that to the degree that we can help the tribes access the state resources and build their capacity to do more for their tribal members is as much part of this as getting an application in.
Definitely. Tim, do you want to jump in here? Yeah, what have you seen on the tribal homelessness side as someone who's been involved in Homekey from the very beginning?
Yeah, many of the same sort of remarks that we've already heard. We at HCD we completely respect and appreciate the tribal sovereignty that exists, and work with tribes, very closely to help them access, these funds. We do recognize that the match is a challenge for tribes, and there are other challenges as well, and that's why we have sort of a formal waiver process where tribes can explain these different challenges to us and request modifications to our program guidelines. So we take that process, very seriously. And the match piece is one of the things that we look at with respect to waivers. On match, I would also add that we did increase our, as I mentioned earlier, our award sort of per unit, and that actually helps quite a bit, especially with respect to the jurisdictions and the tribal governments where the cost of real estate is relatively low as compared to the Bay Area and other places. So that really less match is required, quite a bit less than what would have been required in Homekey 1.0. So that was kind of our thought process, behind raising the capital award per unit for this current iteration of Homekey.
Great, thank you. It's good to hear that, that HCD really has these issues of tribal homelessness at top of mind. I want to kind of pivot here and try to start to think about Homekey projects kind of in relation to the areas where they've been developed. So my question to you all is, how has Homekey and these projects, how have they been beneficial to the areas where they've been located? Larry, maybe you're best to speak about this.
Well, we only have one up and running so far, so I can't tell you unequivocally, but I will tell you, we actually are doing these 5 Homekey projects, and at the same time, we're doing 2 No Place Like Home projects in the same jurisdictions. And these are considered to be major impacts on homelessness. This is both in Sonoma and Napa County through just being able to bring more units on, permanent supportive housing units. A really big deal. I know in a small county like Napa, which most people probably think is, and it is generally pretty wealthy, has a fairly substantial homeless population like every county in the state of California. And these projects will go a long way towards being able to essentially create functional zero in terms of the number of homeless that are in those communities. So we're really excited about the opportunity to be able to be part of that, to be able to, in a county, hopefully, be able to solve homelessness in those counties.
It's fantastic to hear, especially the piece about achieving functional zero homelessness. Tim, I know you kind of gave the HomeKey overview, so you're looking at it from the statewide level, but what have you seen in this regard?
I think it's had a tremendous impact. I mean, on the functional zero side, there was just an article I think recently in the Chronicle about San Mateo County, right? In their HomeKey was really instrumental in making that area. They're not functional zero yet, but they expect to be in the future. Due to HomeKey and due to some other county investments in terms of acquiring hotels. So we're seeing dramatic impacts, I think, at the local level. Obviously, it's become a big part of the state strategy. I mentioned the $12 billion investment in the 21-22 budget. HomeKey is about a quarter of that, almost. There's also another sort of sister HomeKey program, if you will, another acquisition program that's being rolled out by the State Department of Social Services and the State Department of Healthcare Services. They're doing acquisitions that sort of target the homeless population that has more clinically acute needs. That's sort of in the early stages right now, but I think this model of acquiring different property types where the units and the beds can be brought online very quickly is becoming prominent. So that's really good to see because we need to move quickly given what we all see as we drive around. And then I think the flexible funding that was appropriated in that budget as well for the HAP program, HAP, $2 billion, $1 billion this year or $1 billion next year. That's going to cities, counties, and homeless continuums of care. Can be used for a wide variety of uses, including supplementing HomeKey operational costs. So it's sort of an all of the above approach, given the scale and scope of the problem at the state level. 161,000 at last count experiencing homelessness. That's probably changed. So all of the above for sure, but I think these acquisition programs and certainly HomeKey, they're becoming increasingly important to our response to homelessness at the state level.
Fantastic, yeah.
If I could add, the HHAP program also has a separate tribal HHAP. So if there are tribes in the audience that are interested, there is a separate pool within it for tribes that it's very flexible.
Thank you, Lieben. Do you want to go into any more detail about what you're seeing on the applicant side with technical assistance and maybe like how applicants are thinking about HomeKey in relation to an overall homelessness reduction strategy?
That's such a big question.
Yeah.
Given, I think we've seen a change now that there are so many state resources and federal resources that folks are kind of looking at everything and looking for the most flexible program. What is the best fit for addressing the homelessness crisis in their area and for their population? And I think we're in the midst of that, really. How do you put these kinds of pieces together? And to the degree that we don't have to layer funding or can minimize layering of funding, get the dollars out faster, I just think all the better. And, we have, outside of this TA contract, we also have cities that have approached us to try and develop a strategic plan around all of these different state and federal resources. So it's definitely something, top of mind for a lot of the entities.
Definitely. Thank you. Specific question here, But can you speak about your experience with tenant relocation? I know this is kind of a big issue that has cropped up, at least from what we've seen. Yeah, Lieben, do you want to take this
We do-
one, or
yeah.
Larry?
I don't do.
He can go first.
Yeah.
Larry, why don't you go?
We actually have two properties where we have had to do tenant actually relocation. I think I just was told one of the properties that folks have relocated themselves. I don't know what that means. We'll find out more. But the one of them, we actually bought an apartment building at the urging of the county government in this particular case that was occupied. And there were 12, actually 8 units in the building. They really identified this as a great opportunity, and we worked with the tenants. We were able to successfully relocate them into other apartments in Napa County. It was a step up. We worked with the local continuum of care groups that were there to be able to identify housing opportunities that were available in the community. And then now, this has become an issue with us in local governments mostly, is that it's taken us so long to get building permits to be able to do the type of renovation work that we need on the buildings, that we actually had to move folks in first, not our preference, but we had to move people into the buildings, and now we're rotating them through what are called motel units or hotel units out so we could renovate their units. So there's been ongoing relocation that we need to do throughout the process, frankly, because this program, maybe it's because of the success of the program, I don't know, it came on so fast that any of the renovation work that needed to happen to make these occupiable sort of lagged in some ways because of the backlog that exists in most building departments right now in regards to being able to process permits. So.
Thank you. Lieben, you look like you wanted to say something too.
Sure, I could add a couple things. On the relocation side, I think for some of the tribal entities, and it's also true beyond the tribal circumstance, that if you need to relocate residents who have been in a motel or hotel for greater than 30 days, then all of the UFAS and the state relocation law requirements apply. And that has been a tremendous additional cost that has made some of these projects infeasible. In one case with Scotts Valley Band of Pomo Indians, we submitted to HCD a waiver request for the match for the relocation costs to make that project possible, and that is what has made that project actually possible to be awarded and to move forward. We've also dealt with relocation in another circumstance with the city of San Jose, where they have a Homekey 1, where a project is going from interim shelter, really, housing to become permanent, and the relocation piece is complicated, to say the least, in terms of people building community. These interim housing properties, we may think of them as interim housing, but people start to become attached to their neighbors. They have built a community, and then when you talk about moving it to permanent, there are a lot of complexities in, one, how you meet the requirements, but two, also the needs of what is now a community.
Yes, definitely. Tim, do you have any advice to interested applicants, about relocation for their potential projects?
Yeah, I mean, we are super sensitive to relocation. It's very disruptive to folks that are living in these units. It can be very expensive and very difficult as well. Excuse me. We have built in some flexibilities, though, into our program guidelines where if there is an acquisition occurring and the folks that need to be relocated are 30% AMI or below, which oftentimes, they would be, those folks can stay in the units until they sort of naturally vacate. And the point of that policy is really to prevent the sort of, disruption that occurs with, with a formal relocation process. We also have some negative points associated with significant amounts of relocation for Homekey, applicants. Just again to discourage that where we can. We don't want to solve, one problem by housing folks that are experiencing homelessness, but create another by relocating a group of folks. So again, we want to be flexible and help where we can. We do have that allowance for letting some folks stay. We also pay for half of any relocation expenses where relocation is necessary, above and beyond the capital award, because we want to make sure that where relocation is needed, it's done very, very, very well, so that it's a smooth transition for folks that need to be relocated when possible.
If I could add one thing to Tim's comments, the relocation approval process for HCD is definitely a hurdle to get through because it gets reviewed by the Legal Affairs Division, reviewed and approved. So for applicants, I would suggest starting really early to understand your relocation requirements, your budget, and besides really, when you submit your relocation narrative, you really have to have already begun your relocation plan because you cannot get your disbursement until your relocation plan has been approved. And I think that's something that some applicants have been surprised by. So, so that you're not caught off guard, you must have your relocation plan approved prior to disbursement. Even if you've been awarded, you cannot get disbursement until Legal Affairs has approved that.
That's a great point, and I think we could maybe even highlight that in Home Key 3, just so folks are aware up front. And that is really the reason why we require an initial relocation narrative to be submitted with the application, so that folks are thinking about this ahead of time, getting the ball rolling, and hopefully the relocation plan would sort of happen sooner than it otherwise would. So yeah, thank you for that addition.
Yeah, thank you both, Tim, especially for sharing, what HCD's capacity is, and then Lieben for sharing more about the applicant side and their experience. It's both super useful perspectives to hear about. Tim, this is a specific question for you actually, but what does HCD see as criteria for a successful project? Both for this current round and then, maybe moving forward into the next NOFA release.
Right. I mean, I would say, just emphasize again that Home Key really, the genesis of it was a response to an emergency, right, on the COVID side and on the homelessness side. And we saw sort of a broad swath of application types without necessarily HCD, prescribing what is sort of, the platonic ideal of a Home Key application, but some general things we look for, I think, especially, this round and in future rounds. I think there'll be, a continued emphasis and preference on increasing the permanent housing stock, so projects that can convert right away to permanent supportive housing. The state, HCD, actually just released our statewide housing plan not too long ago, maybe a couple weeks ago, where we sort of laid out the need for about 2.5 million new housing units over the next 8 years or so. 1 million of those need to be low-income permanent units. So, that's going to take, of course, an all-of-the-above approach, but Home Key can certainly be part of that in terms of bringing new units and new permanent supportive housing units online. So I would anticipate, an ongoing sort of preference for permanent housing. Also, the sustainability of these projects is really top of mind, as I know it is for applicants as well. So projects that come in with vouchers or with sort of a similarly robust subsidy that can support the operations over time. I think those will continue to be looked upon favorably. And then, and this was mentioned earlier, and I couldn't agree more, the supportive services side. We're looking closely at client outcomes, housing retention, folks being able to, live in a healthy environment. So having, quality supportive service plans, having housing first compliant property management plans, we're going to continue to look closely at that as well as we continue to sort of accept applications.
Thank you. Thank you for spelling all of that out. Larry or Lieben, do you have anything to add? No? Okay, great. This question has to do with sort of the long-term outlook for the HomeKey program, but what recommendations do you all have to ensure that that projects that get awarded and get funded are successful long-term, and what opportunities do you see? What new opportunities do you see moving into the future?
So I guess if there's a thing that keeps me up at night, it's a lot of things that keep me up at night, but it is what's going to happen on the services side once the operational dollars start to fade away on this. And we estimate that out of the initial awards, we should be able to sustain our services probably 5 years. And then after that, we're going to have to start to get creative with the local municipalities. Hopefully, we'll have proven a successful model and we'll be able to attract some philanthropic dollars. But overall, we're going to be looking for ongoing support so that the residents there aren't abandoned. We've had the press headlines. You have all the great outcomes, and then it starts to deteriorate. And we're anticipating that being sort of the next hurdle. So when we look at this 5-10 years down the line, that these can be measured in success by virtue of the fact that we're continuing to provide these services, not just the roof over the people's heads who are there.
Lieben, do you want to add anything?
I completely agree, and I think we can already see this with some prior state programs where the operating subsidy ran out after a certain number of years, and I'm going to say something that HCD may not want me to say. HCD restructured a number of those, so I think they know about it. They also saved a number of those projects, and I know Stephen Marshall's team over at HCD has worked really hard to save those projects, but this program is substantially larger and the risk in terms of keeping them going on the operating subsidy side is substantially larger, I think, than anything HCD has restructured or saved to date. So that, I'm very interested to see what's going to happen, because on some of these, the locality can invest, but I think they're going to be far more units than the localities can support from the year 5 to 15 that's part of this program. So that should be, probably the next thing we should solve, like Larry is saying.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you. Tim, do you have anything to add from the state perspective here?
No, it's top of mind for us in terms of the operational support. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of flexible funding coming down. We've increased our operating award. I get that it's not for the full duration of the project's life cycle. Like, I'll be the first to admit that. We do need more vouchers. We obviously thought we'd get some with Build Back Better. We know what happened with that. We're going to continue to engage in that effort to get more vouchers here to California, because we have just not enough to meet the need, not even close. I am a little bit hopeful on this CalAIM effort. This was mentioned in the Berkeley report, the Turner Center HomeKey report that was released just a little bit ago. I don't know that we've cracked the code with CalAIM, but I am actually hopeful that CalAIM is going to be able to provide some support to these types of projects, HomeKey and otherwise. So I think we at HCD could do a little bit more to help with that effort, working with our colleagues at the Department of Healthcare Services. I think that's a promising approach that might help in this space.
Thank you. Yeah, remains to be seen what will happen with CalAIM. But yeah, definitely, hopefully there can be a little bit more orientation and cooperation in the future. Tim, I want to give you the chance to just share some details about maybe the next NOFA release here, and what interested parties and groups should be looking out for or doing now before that happens to prepare, if folks want to submit applications for the next round, what are the steps that they should be taking?
Mm-hmm. Right, so right now that $1.3 billion tranche is slated to be released in October of 2022. So just sort of be mindful of that. I would imagine there's still going to be some type of over-the-counter process just because of the nature of the program, how time-sensitive these transactions are. So I think it's helpful to start scouting out sites now, start building or solidifying partnerships right now with your developer partner, services provider, property manager, et cetera, because you want to be sort of ready to go when that NOFA gets released. It's probably a little bit, premature for me to say, what the next, NOFA might look like from a program guidelines perspective. I think, once this round is done, we're going to debrief internally and we're going to conduct some really robust stakeholder outreach to see sort of what worked well and what didn't, and make the adjustments that we need to make in order to make it, an even better program. So I wouldn't want to provide any sort of false assurances that we know for sure what the program rules are going to look like, but certainly more to come in a robust stakeholder outreach process to come over the summer. So please do be on the lookout for that.
Thank you very much, Tim. Yeah, before we end the panel and go to Q&A, I just want to give our panelists a last chance to speak out anything pressing that they may want the audience to know about. Any last thoughts from anyone? No?
We can go to questions.
Okay, great. Well, thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Tim, Larry, Lieben, so much for stepping in last minute. I think we will now open it up for question and answers. I see someone over here.
I'd like to shout out all the asset managers, property managers, and supportive services folks in the house. Good work.
And so I wanted to ask a candid question, I guess, about operations and lessons learned in a totally non-judgmental or critical way. I don't mean to ask you to share your dirty laundry, but what lessons, I guess, would you share with us that we can apply as we're securing new PHK sites and moving forward?
I guess I could start. I have what I would characterize as the Sunday 10 p.m. concern, and that is a lot of our social service, in the past, on permanent supportive housing, when we have contracted with certain public agencies, county mental health, they tend not to be available to be on site to provide the type of ongoing support that they need to provide to make these successful. As one of our resident managers told me very succinctly, when our populations at this particular property that does have a large number of permanent supportive housing start to decompensate, it almost never happens Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. And so just having those folks as your partners who we can turn to and say, so-and-so in unit number 36 or whatever, probably needs some ongoing support there. That's, I think, really, really critically important. Another thing that's come up, because the mental health systems are so overtaxed, we have folks that come into our properties with support services, wraparound services that are there, but then they sort of graduate out of them. They're determined to no longer need them. They continue to live, and many will start to slide back, or some, not many, some will start to slide backwards and need services. They then have to go to the back of the list to the normal mental health service, and there's a 2-year-long waiting list. So we're dealing with the population on a regular basis while they're going through the waiting list. So there's a lot of things that I think on the operations side are important in terms of the folks that you partner with. We look for partners that frankly can help us and partner with us to go get resources. So it's not just a question of them being the social worker on site, but they're also tapped into the network of funds that are out there, whether it's private, public, or governmental funds. So identifying those partnerships, developing clear relationships between the property manager and the service provider. We sort of call it a good cop, bad cop kind of approach. It's not quite that way, but we have to enforce the rules at the property, because ultimately we can't have a resident there who's going to be detracting from the overall mission. At the same time, we want to be there so that we're able to give everybody a chance to stay housed. And so those relationships I think, are really, really critically important that you have. The last point I'll say is we couldn't have made these happen, frankly, in at least 2 of our cases, without project-based vouchers, without the revenue coming in to be able to maintain them. We probably would have walked away from at least 2 of these projects, and the local community stepped up and allocated those and had them, fortunately, in both cases, that they could bring to the table.
I'm going to ask one question from the chat, then I'm going to go back to the room. Why will HCD pay more than 50% towards relocation costs for tribal applicants if they do not have matching funds for that?
For tribal applicants, yeah, they can, the process essentially is that they would submit like a formal waiver request, and that would sort of run through our internal approvals. But certainly encourage, any waivers that are necessary in order for tribes to access the funds for them to submit, and we're happy to consider that.
Okay.
Thank you, Shannon. We've talked about sort of downstream and upstream issues like ongoing support for operations. I'm an asset manager, and a lot of the properties in my part of our portfolio are PSH. I'm concerned about the upstream. We're talking about increasing the supply of PSH through HomeKey and other programs. I'm concerned about keeping them full, especially when we have the blessing of PBVs with our local housing authorities, because we get into referral processes. And I wonder if you can speak about experiences you have, wisdom or lessons learned about how we can make sure that that stream keeps coming in to fill the units as they turn, so that we're not sitting on hundreds of empty PSH units.
It's a really good question. I still, my board chair continually brings this to my attention. We had a property that opened in 2019, I think, and we had 13 permanent supportive housing units set aside within those, and they were actually the last to be filled. And as a civilian in this war, she'd walk through it, she goes, I just don't get it. It doesn't make any sense. You walk around, and how many homeless are there out there? Why can't we put homeless into? It's the screening processes just don't keep up, and they're constantly getting dinged, housing authorities by HUD for minor rule infractions, we'd call it, and so they change their systems to ways that often just don't work. I'm totally sympathetic, Mary, to the issue that you're bringing up there. We will sometimes get one potential resident at a time. We have to then go through the whole credit check project, yeah. And then if they don't make it because of some compliance issue, you then have to get the second one. In the meantime, the clock's ticking and the unit's empty. It's frustrating.
How can we change this?
I would love to know. I don't have a magic bullet answer. I don't have a magic bullet answer on that. It's a great question. It is a sad irony to have units sitting vacant when folks are on the sidewalk. I read about that, I hear about that. There's a range of reasons, I think, and some of which Larry just mentioned, but I think it needs to be a priority to make that process quicker any way we can.
I think you have to change the entire screening criteria and the way that folks come into the system for the mainstream folks. On the tribal side, it's, for most of them, they are proposing alternate processes for screening because they know one of the statements that more than one tribe has said is, if we were to go through this screening criteria, the ones that you're talking about, not a single tribal applicant would make their way through, not a single one. So.
And I'm going to ask one chat question and then go to you. What number of units are planned through this program over the coming years?
Great question. So that's going to depend in part on how the awards sort of break down regionally. Obviously, the cost of real estate varies quite a bit between coastal areas versus inland, but and on sort of the project types as well, depending on if we're talking about sort of newly constructed apartment buildings versus older motels. But in general, we're anticipating about 10,000 units to come online for this 2.75 billion in new home key funding. That's in addition to the original 6,000 that I mentioned earlier.
Thank you.
Hi, this is for Tim. You had a map up earlier, and I was wondering if you're going to be having geographic criteria for future applications, or is it just, that was just for our general knowledge? And depending on how you answer, I have a follow-up.
All right. Hopefully I give the right answer. No, in Home Key 1 and Home Key 2, we did have regional set-asides where a certain amount of money was allocated to like 8 different regions on the basis of need, meeting point-in-time count information and rent and burden. We did that for both rounds, and I would anticipate something similar in Home Key 3. That's kind of a key pillar of the program, making sure these funds are spread across the state to all kinds of different communities where homelessness, looks different, honestly. It looks different in rural areas versus urban and the like. And we want to make sure that this goes to the, diverse set of communities where homelessness is an issue.
Okay, so I ask because I'm in Ontario, in the county of San Bernardino, which is really large. And so we have a lot of diversity within our county, but if you're doing this on a county-by-county basis, that might put us at a disadvantage, and I think that's what I was concerned about.
Okay, no, it's not. The regions are generally more than one county, with the exception of LA and San Diego.
Okay.
Other than those 2 areas, the region is more than just the county.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the map is on the HCD Home Key website. It's the dashboard. It's an amazing tool, and it's updated every couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So HCD Home Key, and it says dashboard. So I'll ask another online question. I'll come to you. I think this was for Larry. Are you using your finding to hire supportive services, or are you in collaboration with county and city services?
On Home Key, we're actually using the funds that we've acquired through Home Key to hire, to contract with, and our support services. On other programs, like in No Place Like Home, which we're doing simultaneously, it's coming through the county, county mental health and county human services. So we've actually been using this is a standalone project, and we're using the resources for this project to contract directly with our service providers in this case.
And there was a question about the slides. They will be available after this presentation. I believe they should be available for download on the conference portal or app.
Thank you. Hi, Jennifer Kreitz, Mono County, and I do want to thank Enterprise for the TA because it's been really phenomenal for rural counties, especially Mono County is very rural. And we do have an application in, and kind of getting back to the geographic, and this is for you, Tim. Is there a goal? Well, I guess first would be 2 questions, 2 parts. First, in the, what's it called? You call it the balance of the state. How many counties are in the balance of the state? And is there an objective to actually serve all counties if they should apply? You kind of hinted around looking at point-in-time count. I think rural counties look a lot like tribal communities, and I think homelessness just looks so different. So I think the PIT count isn't always a good indicator. It's hard to find people when they're way out in the public lands living there on that one night in January, especially when you have a lot of snow. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's imperfect at best. Totally acknowledge that, and I understand the hidden nature of homelessness in rural spaces. So that's definitely an end count. I would acknowledge that. It's sort of the best we have, but it's not perfect. The balance of state region, I don't have the number in front of me. It's in our NOFA. It's quite a number of counties though in that balance of state. It's sort of it's a little bit of a catch-all for all the more rural counties, sort of up and down the state. So, because the set-aside is sort of based on need, in all reality, we wouldn't be able to fund sort of every county in the balance of state, but we do have a discretionary reserve, as we call it, as well, so that to the extent that that balance of state is oversubscribed, we could tap into that other pot of money and fund applications in the balance of state as well as other regions.
And I'll come back to you. We have a question from the chat, putting Jenny's question here. Thank you, Jenny. Will you plan to make adjustments prior to the next release?
adjustments to the program?
I'm gonna go with yes.
Yeah, the NOFA, yeah. So we will, I'm sorry if I wasn't clear on this, we will absolutely do stakeholder outreach prior to the next NOFA and take all that into consideration as we develop the next iteration. So I think the short answer to that question is yes.
Trying to equitably distribute the questions between online and in the room.
So, I mean, I think you're going to give me the short answer, yes, but if you can elaborate, has there been consideration about not having the city be the lead applicant? I know in our region, our cities are so small and they're so short-staffed that they've actually said to us, we don't want to do this, we don't want to be the lead applicant. Is there another way that we can prove to the state that the cities are on board, that the will is there without them taking that lead applicant role? For us, with round 2, there was just so much work that we needed to do on our end before we got it to the city, before it could go to city council so that they could even decide to be the lead applicant, that it just fell apart, again, because our cities are so small and they just don't have that capacity. So if we can problem solve about to have a way that we can prove to the state that the cities are on board without them necessarily being the lead applicant.
Great question. I know that local public entities, sort of by statute, need to be the lead applicant, whether it's a city, a county, housing authority, or other type of local public entity. I honestly think the reasoning there is that homelessness is a local issue, and the state is sort of kickstarting these projects by providing the capital funding, but we want as you referenced, we want the local jurisdictions to have some ownership over these as well. I totally respect that capacity differs from city to city, county to county. That's a very, very valid point. And I think that's why this partnership with Enterprise is so important and so critical to the success, because their consultants are there, in addition to our staff, but their consultants are there to provide help and support for those lower capacity, short-staffed jurisdictions to get these projects over the finish line. I would also say, even though the local jurisdiction is sort of the lead applicant, the co-applicant developer can be sort of the owner-operator of these projects, can put together the application, take the lead on that. But the jurisdiction would certainly be sort of a signatory on the standard agreement, and both parties would be, sort of equally responsible for those terms and conditions.
And I'll go online and then I'll come to you. On one home key project, the city felt the CEQA exemption triggered prevailing wage and use of their procurement program.
Wow.
This created operational challenges and costs. Has there been any clarification on this?
So yeah, a couple of things I would say with prevailing wage. Home key in general triggers that for all projects. It's automatically triggered whether you're using our CEQA exemption or not. The CEQA exemption generally does trigger what's called skilled and trained labor, which is another sort of step above prevailing wage, the use of union labor basically on home key projects. So that does add to the cost, certainly, and I think that's something to account for as the pro forma is built. Getting some confirmation here from Larry. But that's just, with these CEQA exemptions, it's very common for the skilled and trained piece to be kind of a part of the deal. It's in the statute. So it's just sort of how it works.
Yeah, actually, I would add that it's probably about somewhere between 20 and 30% difference between prevailing and non-prevailing wage. But then if you add the skilled and trained on top of that, it's really an additional probably 10 to 20% in terms of cost that you'd have to build into the program, as well as the availability of labor to be able to work on the projects themselves. There's not always a lot of available union labor force in the community to be able to pivot and work on these projects. So it is a problem. I understand the politics behind it, and they have to operate within the rules that they're given, but it's certainly not helpful.
So actually, I have a question for Tim on this front. So we've had conversations, quite a few actually, with HCD staff about what is really skilled labor. And there doesn't seem to be one answer. So curious as to if there's been more conversation about that internally.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I should say that actually the State Department of Industrial Relations is the entity that regulates all of this. So there's, a decent body of work on that. And probably the most, and actually they have a new sort of unit that provides education and enforcement in this space. So I think it'd actually be most efficient to loop them into this conversation, and they'd be more than happy, I think, to educate where needed on what that means in terms of skilled and trained.
Yeah, it's interesting because DIR, we've had conversations with DIR
Oh, okay.
about HomeKey.
They brought you back
Yes.
to me?
They
Okay.
they contacted back to you, just so you know.
Nice, okay.
So it's a really interesting question because for HCD HomeKey, the applicant certifies that they will pay the prevailing wage, right? And they will comply with this requirement, but HCD is not the oversight entity, DIR is. But DIR themselves state they don't have the capacity to enforce here. So it is only if someone raises an issue or raises a case that they will allocate staff specifically for that case. So it's been an interesting kind of like challenge in terms of how to advise the applicants on what their requirements are.
Yeah, and I'll tell you
Yeah.
flat out, we would not do it. We would not apply for a secret exemption because we wouldn't do a project if skilled in trade. It's setting us up for failure as far as we're concerned, so.
Yeah, and that was my question, and just a follow-up is that we've dealt with development side having to do prevailing wage and et cetera, but under this, it's flowing into the operations. So it's the management and the operations of the property that then also has the skill and train challenge. Extremely costly, and we're a statewide management company, and we told clients, if you've got to do the prevailing wage, we don't have the capacity for it. So we're not managing some of the HomeKey stuff because we don't have the capacity to do that on an operational basis.
I just want to make sure people don't conflate prevailing wage and skilled in trade. They're really two separate things. We pay prevailing wage. Most of our project, every state-supported project virtually requires prevailing wage. We build it into the underwriting. It's the skilled in trade that's a relatively new component to it, and that really limits the labor force that you can access, which is what really causes the issue.
So I think this actually might lead into my question. So Capri Roth from Uvalde. I think the thing that's been so interesting to me about HomeKey is that we've, seen for a very long time in this state that there's been a really steady approach to how affordable housing is brought online. And this is very disruptive in a way that is, incredibly necessary. I think, COVID-19 certainly put a point on the level of crisis, but I would say, we have an existing and ongoing homelessness crisis. We have a crisis of lack of affordable housing for people who even aren't experiencing homelessness but are still extremely rent burdened or unable to secure safe housing. And so I think this is a question that's a little bit, asked to Enterprise and to Tim, on an advocacy and policy side, how can we encourage the state to think more about how to transform the affordable housing landscape, the financing landscape, to address this, entire environment on a crisis basis and, take the sort of like great successes of HomeKey and expand that into some of the rest of our affordable housing development environment.
It's a very timely question, actually, because HCD recently just launched a new notice of funding availability process for some of our multifamily sort of perm funding programs where, about 4 programs or so, those funds are all being released and made available simultaneously to sort of expedite how funding is distributed, and that in turn impacts how quickly units can be built. So I think some of this sort of one-stop shop nature of HomeKey is already sort of being tested out elsewhere in the suite of HCD programs, right? I think new construction is always going to be kind of a slower process than these acquisition type programs, of which HomeKey is one. But I think part of the delay in new construction is the fact that applicants need to go and secure multiple different funding sources which are all available at different times. So HCD is doing a lot of work in that space to try and streamline that process and make that funding available sooner and make it just easier to obtain it so that these units can be brought online relatively faster.
That was the last question. I think the mic agrees that that's the last question.
Didn't pay the bill.
And
Yes,
I wanted
1220.
to have Amiel raise his hand. Amiel is with Enterprise, and he's on the policy and legislative team working to address issues like this. So we do have a team that's working on this as well as other policy-related issues. Thank you to everyone who stayed over time to listen to this great panel. Thank you to all of our panelists. There are, in the slide deck that you should be able to download, there's information on additional resources as well as everyone's contact information.
Yeah,
So have a
exactly.
great Housing
That's right.
California conference, everyone.